Hamas leader Khalid Mishal says that any ceasefire agreement with Tel Aviv will have to include the lifting of the Israeli siege on Gaza. Diplomatic efforts to end the Israeli offensive on Gaza have so far failed to prove fruitful, as the civilian death toll nears 700. And the Palestinian Authority accuses the Zionist regime of committing a crime against humanity, while the UN says the Israeli offensive could amount to war crimes. Hello there, you're watching Al Ittijah World News and I'm Fatima Basim. In his first appearance since the beginning of the conflict in occupied Gaza Strip, Hamas's political bureau chief Khalid Mishal stated that the group rejects any ceasefire agreements before the Israeli siege is lifted. However, Mishal stated that they can accept a humanitarian truce that is supported by a genuine relief program for the besieged enclave.
We're keen on a truce for a few hours, a humanitarian window to vacate the wounded. We can accept any humanitarian truce in that sense supported by a genuine human relief program. That we can accept, but we cannot give up on our terms. We will not accept any initiative that does not lift a blockade on our people and that does not respect their sacrifices. Let us agree on achieving our demands, and we will then agree on the 0 hour for a ceasefire.
Well, the death toll from 16 days of incessant Israeli aggression against Gaza has reached an appalling 693, including 166 children, as the number of injuries soars to more than 4,500. Over 73 Palestinians have been killed so far since the early hours of Wednesday, as dozens of others were wounded in Israeli attacks. The numbers are expected to skyrocket as medical teams are still retrieving the bodies of victims from under the rubble. Israeli warplanes pounded the besieged enclave, specifically the cities of Rafah and Khan Yunis, as well as Beit Lahia. In many cases, Israeli occupation forces even prevented ambulances from rushing to the site of the bombings. Israeli artillery and warplanes destroyed a number of houses and targeted mosques in Beit Hanun and Gaza City. Even hospitals have become a target of the Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip, making it difficult for medical workers to provide the necessary treatment for those in critical condition. Bassam Al-Atrash gives us a look now into the dire humanitarian crisis the Palestinians are facing in the besieged enclave.
As the Israeli offensive enters its third week, hospitals in Gaza are on the verge of a total collapse. 25 medical facilities, including hospitals and clinics, have so far been targeted by Israeli warplanes on the besieged enclave, unable to escape the brutal Zionist aggression. And although hospitals lack power, water, medical supplies, and fuel, medical teams are continuing to provide the best services possible.
For sure, this deliberate targeting of hospitals by the Israelis in light of the shortage in resources makes the task at hand almost impossible and begs the question, will we be able to continue to treat such large number of casualties on the one hand and the direct targeting of medical facilities on the other?
The 8-year siege imposed on the coastal enclave, accompanied by a barbaric Zionist offensive, has led to the complete disintegration of the coastal enclave's health system. As the number of victims among Palestinian civilians soars, medical teams and paramedics are relying on primitive tools to perform their duties and treat their patients. And to add insult to injury, the Israelis' continued targeting of medical vehicles and a shortage in medical supplies has made treating the injured almost impossible.
We use simple primitive tools, hand barrows. We walk half the distance. Our vehicles cannot enter due to the heavy bombardment. We cannot reach the patients. We lack medical supplies and our vehicles are old and damaged. No fuel is available.
When the victims finally arrive to the hospital, doctors assess their condition. If no emergency medical treatment is needed, the patient is immediately discharged. Moderate injuries that would normally be treated are also told to leave. With 2 hours of electricity a day, no surgical tools and operating rooms. Conditions at Gazan hospitals have reached a dire state.
Actually, we all the victims which coming here in an emergency need to admit it. No, we haven't enough places. 3 days or 4 days ago, we haven't enough places. What we can do?
Appealing for international support and humanitarian aid, Palestinian hospitals are in a grim state. According to the Health Ministry, the aid that is provided on a normal basis does not suffice and is barely helping support an already depleted health system. As the Israeli offensive against Gaza continues, trying to treat the wounded has reached a critical stage, and unless urgent aid is delivered soon, hospitals in the Strip may be forced to close their doors. Balsam Al-Atrash, Litijah TV, Shifa Hospital in Gaza.
Well, Balsam is standing by for us in the Gaza Strip. Balsam, earlier Hamas leader Khalid Mishal said there will be no truce until Palestinian demands are met. Is that the sentiment across Gaza?
Yes, true. Khalid Mishal said that there will not be a truce until the Palestinian terms are met. Also, the Palestinians here on the ground agree with him and say that they will resist and fight, and the bloodshed that just occurred in the past 17 days doesn't go for waste. They need their demands to be met, and they don't want a ceasefire until the siege and blockade is completely lifted on the Gaza Strip and their demands are met. They are telling me that there is a new shelling and bombing in the northern eastern border of the Gaza Strip. The Israeli warplanes are throwing flare-up bombs to expose the area in order for them to strike right now. Yes. The Israeli drones also haven't left the air since yesterday here in this area in particular. Seems like they are planning to strike. Yes, another flare-up bombs are being led in the sky. They need to expose the area before they strike.
Yes, and we know that medical teams are also retrieving bodies from under the rubble. Have they been successful in finding the latest bodies that have been struck by Israeli rockets?
Yes, true. Today's death toll alone was 73 Palestinians. 50 alone have been retrieved from the area of Khuza'a, the area that had been a massacre in it, just like Shijaiya massacre. 50 have been retrieved from Khuza'a, 73 today's death toll alone from different areas of the Gaza Strip, raising the total death toll for the 17th day now to 693 Palestinians killed. Eyewitnesses through phone call about an hour ago confirmed that there are still people under the rubble. Some people are still trapped in their homes and cannot evacuate. They appealed for help, and it seems like none of the humanitarian organizations are available in order for them to help them evacuate their places. Medical teams managed to reveal some of the victims, and others are still under the debris.
And we know that they are striking mosques and hospitals and even schools. Is there any place in Gaza that is safe right now?
Well, actually, no place here is safe. Schools, mosques, hospitals are all a target for the Israeli warplanes and tank shelling. They had just struck a school about a while ago, and they hit also a mosque today in Gaza, leaving hundreds of since they hit during worshippers were praying Dhuhr prayer at that mosque. Also schools, as I mentioned, was hit. Hospitals, around 3 or 4 actually hospitals, mainly big hospitals have been targeted. Shuhada Al-Aqsa Hospital, Al-Wafa Hospital, Eastern Gaza, Algerian Hospital in Khan Yunis, and the European Hospital in Rafah. Other than more than 20 other clinics, medical clinics that have been a target also for the Israeli warplanes. So end of the talk is that no place here is safe in Gaza. There's no shelters, no sirens for the rockets, and all place is a target for the Israeli warplanes and tanks.
What about the counteroffensive made by the resistance? Have they been able to deal a major blow to the Israelis? We know that the suspension of European and American flights has been quite a success.
Yes, the Palestinian resistance groups were successful in resisting and fighting back against the Israeli troops on the border today and yesterday, and since the ground invasion there has been ongoing clashes and fire between both sides, resulting a large number of casualties and injuries among the Israelis. Today, the Israeli army confessed 2 Israelis been killed. Another 20, including 3 of them critical injured by the Palestinian resistance groups. Also in Khan Yunis and later in the afternoon, 3 Israeli soldiers were killed by Palestinian resistance groups in the area, and another 17 were injured as well. Also, Al-Qassam Brigade had released a video showing that they had sniped and killed an Israeli commander, a commander in the Israeli troops on the northern border of Beit Hanun.
All right, thank you for giving us the latest updates in Gaza. Balsam Al-Atrash, our correspondent there. The Palestinian resistance is beating the odds by undermining the Israelis' military capabilities using its relatively modest means. At least 137 Israeli soldiers have been injured in violent clashes between occupation forces and Palestinian resistance factions in the east of Jabalia, Beit Hanun and Khan Yunis, where an Israeli soldier was sniped in the east of the city. Meanwhile, the Israeli military announced that 2 of its officers were killed and 20 others wounded during clashes with Palestinian resistance fighters on Tuesday. This as barrages of rockets were fired into Israeli settlements including Ashkol, Ashkelon, Sderot and Sha'ar Negev, as well as Gosh Dan in Tel Aviv, which was targeted with dozens of rockets, of which 4 were intercepted. The Al-Qassam Brigades, Hamas's military wing, also claimed responsibility for targeting an Israeli F-16 with a missile over the central town of Deir el-Balah, as well as a Merkava tank east of Jabalia. All American carriers and several European ones have halted their flights to the Israeli entity after the Federal Aviation Authority banned U.S. airlines from traveling to Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport for at least 24 hours. The surprise move comes after a rocket fired by Palestinian resistance groups landed near the airport.
A rocket blast near the Israeli entity's main international airport has triggered major flight cancellations for the first time in more than 2 decades. The move caused chaos and hysteria as stranded passengers looked for a way out of Tel Aviv. Israeli officials, meanwhile, are furious with American Airlines' regulatory body.
I can tell you, first of all, that we regret the American FAA decision. We think it was out of place. Even according to their own regulations, there was no reason to halt the flights from and to Ben Gurion Airport, since Ben Gurion Airport is secure and completely safe.
The surprise move highlights another major strategic loss for the military, superior Israelis with the Western world, acknowledging that the Israeli brutal offensive in Gaza is failing to achieve the entity's stated goals.
So Hamas does have rockets that can reach Ben Gurion Airport. During current fighting, Hamas rockets have landed north of the airport, although the accuracy of their rockets does remain limited. Israel's Iron Dome system, which, as you know, we work very closely with them to develop and fund, has monitored and with quite a high degree of success destroyed many of the incoming rockets, which could reach this area as well as other areas.
The Israeli newspaper Haaretz perhaps sums it up best. The paper said with a single rocket, Hamas might just have achieved the game changer in this current conflict, in other words, damaging the entity's precious economy. The last time there was a wide-scale suspension of flights to the Israeli entity by foreign airlines was in early 1991, when Iraqi Scud missiles launched during the first Gulf War. Israelis did not travel abroad as often as they do now. More significantly, the local economy was not integrated into the global markets as it is today, with hundreds of international companies having research centers in the Israeli high-tech hubs and thousands of companies totally reliant on export markets. One early measure of the potential economic effects of this conflict was an announcement by El Al, the national carrier, saying it expects to lose at least $40 million in the current quarter due to passenger cancellations.
The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry took his truce mission to occupied Palestine as the barbaric Israeli aggression on Gaza entered its 16th day. Kerry flew in from Cairo for whirlwind talks. In occupied Al-Quds and Ramallah, he held talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. The US's top diplomat once again met with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, aiming to revive the faltering ceasefire efforts.
We're working hard, and I'm not going to get into the characterizing, but we have certainly made some steps forward. There's still work to be done. But I'm very appreciative. The Secretary General is making great efforts. The UN is wholeheartedly in this effort to try to see if we can advance not just a ceasefire, but a sustainable process going forward, which is very important.
We do not have much time to wait and lose. I really appreciate Secretary Kerry's very intensive, very dynamic engagement with the world leaders. As I have been doing together, we are now joining our forces and strength to make a ceasefire as soon as possible.
Earlier, Al-Ihtijaz Between the Lines hosted former UK intelligence officer Charles Shoebridge and Yvonne Ridley, the founder of Viva Palestine. They say that Washington is the only international player that can pressure the Israelis to accept a ceasefire.
Sisi is susceptible to American pressure, but not as much as Egypt once was. Let's not forget that the key backer now of Egypt has shifted pretty much from the United States to Saudi Arabia. And so Saudi Arabia may see no advantage for itself in benefiting Hamas in any way, benefiting the people of Gaza in any way, and certainly not doing anything to reduce Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But I think in all of this, the United States is the key player. And I say that because we should be under no illusion that without American backing and perhaps European, shall we say, looking away from the scene, turning a blind eye to this, but without American aid, financial and military, within a few days of the United States saying to Israel, stop, even if they said it so diplomatically behind the scenes, Israel would have to stop this offensive. And I think that with this increasing civilian carnage, death toll, and many, many people being maimed, of course, by this offensive, we are getting quite close to the point at which the United States will be indicating to Israel that it will have to stop.
The US has the influence and the power over Israel. Israel has one God, and that is money. And America has the will to be able to do this. And, you know, Charles is right about all of the social media, the tens and tens of thousands of people who have been demonstrating. And it's not just in the West. Jewish activists actually went outside the Holocaust Museum in Israel, Yad Vashem, and created a bonfire out of a load of baby dolls. There are people within Israel who are disgusted by the military actions on the people of Gaza. And there are Jewish people around the world who are supporting the people of Gaza against this war, who are disgusted by what is being done in their name. So popular public opinion has drowned out the mainstream media, and also the shocking deaths of those 4 boys on Gaza Beach right in the eyes of the watching media has had an impact. And I think that Israel this time has seriously underestimated public opinion, has once again seriously underestimated the resistance of the Palestinian people, and has seriously underestimated the military wiles of Hamas.
Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki has accused the Israeli entity of committing a crime against humanity. Maliki was speaking during a UN Human Rights Council emergency session on Gaza, where he further elaborated his remarks by listing the atrocities committed by the Israelis against the Palestinian people, including the destruction of residential areas and the systematic targeting of journalists. Meanwhile, the UN Human Rights Council chief, Navi Pillay, warned that the Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip could amount to war crimes.
Has never known life outside occupation and is already living through her or his third experience of a major Israeli military operation, including the so-called Operations Cast-led in 2009 and Pillar of Defense in 2012, with all the unimaginable death, destruction, terror, and the lifelong consequences that they inflicted.
As the Israeli entity carries on with its aggression against the Palestinians in the occupied Gaza Strip, the Islamic Republic of Iran, as both a government and nation, is continuously showing its support for the people of Palestine. Our correspondent in Tehran, Hussein Dabash, has more.
As the war on the besieged Gaza Strip by the Israeli entity continues, Iran is wasting no time in showing its solidarity with the people of Palestine. According to Iranian President Sheikh Hassan Rouhani, the Israeli entity is not allowing Iranian aid to enter the besieged coastal enclave.
They are killing everyone in Gaza, including women and children. They are killing children, women, and elderly people. And unfortunately, they are not allowing us to send our medical aid into Gaza. We are ready to admit all the Palestinian injured in the blockaded Gaza Strip and treat them here in Iran. There are only a few wars in the world in which a small number of people with no or limited weapons are under full siege and exposed to the barbarianism of such groups.
Meanwhile, the spokesman for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps is on the sidelines of a press conference for the upcoming International Quds Day has slammed what he called the Zionist regime's crimes on Gaza.
The inhuman action against the Gaza Strip shows the weakness of the Zionist regime. These actions against defenseless people will further harm its interest and the region's as well. No doubt, the International Quds Day, which was founded by Imam Khomeini, has shed more light on the cause of the Palestinian people, which has been under oppression by the Israeli regime, including these days.
Another senior official in the realm of Iranian politics who has called for more support for the Palestinians is Ali Akbar Velayati, the top advisor to the leader of the Islamic Revolution.
The world should stand by the innocent people of Palestine. Unfortunately, we do not see this as much as it should happen. Like Egypt, rather than being a Muslim nation, the government deliberately refuses to open the main Rafah crossing into the besieged Gaza Strip, refuses to do so. Therefore, it is stopping the aid that can help many helpless people in Gaza.
Citizens of Iran across the country, including in the capital Tehran, have showed their disapproval of the current war on Gaza. Many people here in the Islamic Republic, according to a national poll, believe that it was the Israeli entity that started its current war on the Gaza Strip, as always. So far, help by the Iranian government and the people to the Gaza Strip has been stopped deliberately by the Israeli entity, but the Iranian government has vowed that it will do whatever it takes to get the message across to the world body to send in Iran's help and other governments' help to the besieged Gaza Strip and the people there. Reporting for AEE TV, Hussein Dabash, Tehran.
You're watching AEE World News, still to come. 40 bodies of the MH17 plane crash victims return home from Ukraine.
يابا شايف هاي الأرض؟ شايفها يابا؟ هاي البلاد، هاي أرض سيدي وسيدك، هاي أرضك، هذا وطنك، هاي أرضنا يلي انحرمنا منها، هاي زتونتنا اللي بالسهل، هاي زتونتنا اللي بالسهل، هاي أمك، ما في أغلى من الأم يابا، ما في أغلى من فلسطين يابا.
Welcome back to Early Tija World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Hamas leader Khalid Mishhan says that any ceasefire agreement with Tel Aviv will have to include the lifting of the Israeli siege on Gaza. Diplomatic efforts to end the Israeli offensive on Gaza have so far failed to prove fruitful as the civilian death toll nears 700. And the Palestinian Authority accuses the Zionist regime of committing a crime against humanity, while the UN says the Israeli offensive could amount to war crimes. In an accelerating turn of events, 2 Ukrainian military jets were shot down over rebel-held territory in eastern Ukraine. A Ukrainian army spokesman said that the 2 Sukhoi fighter jets have been shot down and the fate of the pilots is unknown. For their part, the rebels admitted to shooting down just one of the aircraft. The incident comes as troops loyal to Kiev pound the rebel stronghold of Donetsk, killing dozens of civilians in just the last 48 hours. 2 planes carrying the first retrieved bodies from Malaysian Airways flight MH17 shot down over eastern Ukraine last week have arrived home in the Netherlands.
The Dutch flag is flying at half-mast across the Netherlands. That's where the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 set off from on its final journey, and now the remains of 40 of its passengers are returning back home one last time. Dutch and Australian military aircrafts flew the remains into Eindhoven's airbase, where they were met by bereaved relatives and high-ranking government officials. Mourners laid flowers as they waited for the arrival of 40 victims. A ceremony honoring the victims of the downed Malaysian plane was held at Ukraine's Kharkiv airport.
Today, your journey home begins. It still will be a long journey. We have a painful identification process to go through that will take time. But the Dutch government wants to assure family members and all those concerned that we want to do the identification as quickly as possible, with full respect for human dignity and the individual.
And now the long process of trying to figure out what happened to the aircraft The black boxes from MH17 have been delivered to the Air Accidents Investigation Branch southwest of London, and although these mechanical components of the airliner may not be able to reveal what shot down the aircraft, they may shed some light into how events unfolded on that fateful day. As the remains of the passengers begin returning to their home countries, the world is yet to determine whether the downing was an accident or an act of terror. Despite the fact that no investigation into the accident has been completed, U.S. officials say the plane was shot down by pro-Russian separatists in the region. Whatever the case, the spike in tensions between Moscow on one side and Western governments on the other may make it difficult to ever get an accurate picture of what exactly happened here.
All right, let's now speak to political analyst William Spring for more on this. Mr. Spring, how much will looking into the airliner's black boxes help reveal what actually led to the downing of MH17?
I frankly don't know, because I'm not an aeronautical engineer. I'm quite sure there'll be very relevant information in those black boxes, but the nature of it I can't really comment on.
Is it fair to accuse Russia of being behind the downing of the plane before credible evidence has been put forward?
No, well, there's no credible evidence being put forward at all by the Americans to indicate that Russia was behind the tragedy. In fact, I think they made a statement today, the Americans, backtracking on earlier claims that Russia was behind the tragedy. The only thing is they're saying that Russia set up the circumstances in which the jet or the airliner could be brought down. That's all very questionable. As far as I can see, the circumstances which brought down the airliner were set up by NATO and the EU and Catherine Ashton, who encouraged a civil war to begin in the Ukraine. There was no particular reason to have a civil war in the Ukraine other than the fact that the right sector and the Zavoba party, the people who lost the elections originally, wanted it. But the European Union, including the Netherlands, pushed for a civil war. Now, civil wars are very okay things as long as it's not your own citizens dying in them. And the Netherlands and Britain and France have been quite happy to push for civil war in Ukraine. But at the moment their own nationals become victims of this civil war, then it's a different matter. I don't think that that the civil war in the Ukraine is the responsibility of Russia. The state that disappeared or dissolved into chaos and anarchy was the Ukrainian state when the president fled. There were elections to be held, presidential elections, in 2015, but that was not soon enough for the NATO powers who wanted to destabilize Ukraine before then. So as a result of the destabilization of the Ukrainian state ceased to exist as a credible democratic state following constitutional principles. NATO and the EU subverted legal and constitutional principles in the Ukraine. And this is having sown the wind, we're reaping the whirlwind. But I do not think that Russia is particularly to blame for this. This is the result of a failure of diplomacy on the part of the European Union and of NATO. And NATO, of course, never wanted a diplomatic solution. Some people in the European Union may now be regretting that they didn't push for one.
What do you make of claims by US officials that Ukrainian rebels received training in Russia and had the capacity to shoot down the plane? Because that seems to be the narrative that the West is sticking to.
Well, frankly, I sincerely hope Ukrainian rebels are training in Russia, because if they were training in Russia, they probably would have avoided the terrible tragedy that has now occurred. Not that we can necessarily say that the downing of this Malaysian airliner was the result of so-called separatists. Incidentally, I'll just mention that the word separatists was not in the political vocabulary until the Americans put it there. The people in eastern Ukraine were originally federalists looking for more autonomy. They wanted discussions with the central Ukrainian government, but the central Ukrainian government didn't want to talk to their own citizens. They preferred to bomb them. They prefer to massacre them. When we're talking about Gaza, there's another equally significant massacre going on in Donetsk. Not quite so many people have died yet, but NATO will soon push the numbers up. The OSCE has given some statistics about the numbers who've died in Donetsk and Slavansk and various other cities in eastern Ukraine. And it is absolutely horrifying that the Ukrainian government, so-called government, in fact it's merely a regime, but this tattered regime of terrorists should seek to bomb their own people into submission because they've fouled it up. What's happened, Poroshenko, what his name is, has fouled it up completely. When he came to power, he said he would go to the east, he would find out what their grievances were, he would explore those grievances and enter into dialogue. He never did anything of the sort. All he did was take from his American paymasters the weapons necessary to destroy civilized life in the southeast of Ukraine. And this is all very sad.
All right, political analyst William Spring, thank you for speaking to Ali Tijah.
Thank you.
The vote to elect a new president of Iraq has once again been delayed by the Iraqi parliament, but only for 24 hours. Iraq's parliament approved the delay of the vote to give the Kurds time to choose their nominees for the highest Kurdish post in the Iraqi government.
We have received a request from the Kurdish bloc asking to delay voting on the presidential post until tomorrow to give them time to agree on one nominee, saying that they are determined to reach a decision by tonight.
Well, Iraqi lawmakers have united against a campaign launched by the Islamic State militants aimed at dividing Iraq along sectarian and ethnic lines. Rehab al-Rakabi reports.
The forcible expulsion of the Iraqi minorities in the militant overrun territories in northwestern Iraq has put severe pressure on Iraqi lawmakers to take quick measures to tackle the disastrous humanitarian situation caused by the militant advances that threatens to destroy the social fabric of Iraqi society. During the fourth legislative session, which has been held on Tuesday, July 15th, with the aim to select the new president of the republic and his two deputies, Iraqi political blocs appear to have united their position on the terror campaign by the extremist militants linked to Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant against the country's ethnic and religious groups in north and west of the country. Iraqi parliament has urged immediate action on the mass displacement of the country's ethnic and religious groups, and the lawmakers have agreed to swiftly establish relief committees to aid the growing population of internally displaced people who have been uprooted by a campaign of ethnic and religious cleansing led by the extremist militants.
Parliament Leadership Committee has been closely following the situation of displaced people who are living in life-threatening circumstances amid severe shortages of shelter, basic needs and medical supplies. Thus, I, as Parliament Speaker, call upon you all to take the responsibility to end this crisis. We call upon the central government and Kurdistan regional government and the parliament to take swift measures to stop the heinous crimes by the ISIL militants against Iraqi ethnic and religious minorities, and to provide financial and humanitarian aid to the refugee camps.
Moreover, many lawmakers assert that the continued brutalities carried out by the extremist militants are aimed to make demographic changes in Iraq and to divide the country along ethnic sectarian lines.
The ongoing humanitarian crisis has been greeted by a constant silence from inside and outside, and this is considered a clear sign of introducing a demographic change and, eventually, an ethnic and sectarian division.
According to new and latest figures, some 1.2 million Iraqis have been internally displaced as a result of the violence, including over 600,000 since the beginning of June alone. However, the genocide the extremist militants are carrying out against Iraq's Shia, Turkmen, Shabak, Christian and Yazidi communities have been emboldened by the world's silence and inaction. And the huge numbers of internally displaced people across the country need now their representatives in the legislature to translate their supportive words into an immediate action to cast away their daily sufferance. With the country's ever-deepening security crisis, many assert that a political unity is now considered to be vital for Iraq to counter the growing militancy that threatens to split the country. Ihab al-Rikabi, Al-Ittijah, Baghdad.
The holy city of Najaf has gained prominence as a center of political power since the beginning of the Iraqi crisis that raised the prospect of the country being divided along sectarian and ethnic lines.
Apart from being the home to the shrine of the first Shia Imam, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, which is one of the most sacred holy sites for Shias and Muslims in general, Najaf is also a center for religious learning. The city is also the location of the Marja'iyah, or the highest religious authorities in Shia Islam, the most prominent of which in Iraq is Ayatollah Sayyid Ali as-Sistani. The recent fatwa or edict issued by Sayyid Sistani is a great reflection of the central role that Najaf and the Marja'iyah enjoy in Iraqi society. After the so-called Islamic State overran several Iraqi cities in western and northern Iraq several weeks ago, the political paralysis in the country has gone from bad to worse. It was at that crucial point in time that Ayatollah Sayyid Sistani issued a fatwa from Najaf calling on Iraqi citizens to defend the country, its people, the honor of its citizens and its sacred places. The fatwa was heeded by millions of Iraqis who consider Sistani a spiritual leader and an important voice for the unity of Iraq.
The new Iraq has its own circumstances and nature, and the ones who drew the lines of this new Iraq is the Marja'iyah.
Media outlets of some Arab states unjustly attacked the fatwa as an irresponsible move that may lead to sectarian violence, and other Sunni scholars went as far as calling it a war declaration against the Sunnis. In fact, the fatwa was a call to all Iraqis to defend their country, and the volunteers represented all religious denominations from a wide spectrum of Iraqi provinces. Sayyid Sistani directed all interested volunteers to enlist in the army, according to the law, and to fill the deficit in the Iraqi security forces. The latest fatwa by Sistani has reinforced the key role that the holy city of Najaf plays as a center of political and military power, which it is hoped will guarantee the unity of the crisis-stricken country.
The Iraqi semi-autonomous Kurdistan region has made its push for independence clearer after the start of a military operation to eliminate Islamic State fighters from the disputed Kirkuk province.
The Kurds in Iraq have finally made a push to oust the extremist militants from Kirkuk after staking their claim for independence from the central government in Baghdad. The Peshmerga, the official army for the current semi-autonomous Kurdish region, began the drive to eliminate militants belonging to the Islamic State from the province after cementing their positions in the city of Kirkuk and surrounding oil fields. Last month, the Iraqi army was overwhelmed by the ferocity of the Islamic State's advancement and had to withdraw from the northern region. The Kurds took advantage of the ensuing security vacuum and flooded Kirkuk with fighters. Later, it was declared as the fourth province by the Kurdistan Regional Government President Masoud Barzani, who also called for a referendum on independence for Kurdistan. Now that the Kurds have begun the operation to wipe out the Al-Qaeda offshoot militants, the Kurdish head of the National Security Council, Mansour Barzani, has asked for Western assistance to strengthen the region.
ISIS now has a lot of modern military equipment in their possession. And to fight against them, I think the Peshmergas have to be much more equipped than they are. And for that, I think the US and the international community as a whole should feel responsible, and they have a moral responsibility to come to the assistance of those people that are putting their lives on line to protect civilians.
With a referendum for separation only months away, the Kurds have infuriated the Iraqi government with their unilateral move. But they have also angered the extremists following their operation in Kirkuk, with many analysts predicting that it's only a matter of time before IS militants respond and finally attack the Kurdish region.
Once a safe haven for Islamic State militants, the Iraqi army has regained full control of Jurf al-Sakhr, south of Baghdad. This is the latest attempt by security forces to rid the Iraqi capital of extremist militants. Mustafa Al-Qattan reports.
In a continued effort to eradicate the militants out of Iraq, Iraqi security forces are carrying out constant attacks on the militant hideouts in different parts of the country. Iraqi army with volunteer forces could penetrate IS-controlled territories in Jurf al-Sakhr in northern Babel province and managed to kill around 50 IS members in a fresh wave of clashes in that area. According to military officials, Jurf al-Sakhr, 85 kilometers south of Baghdad, is now in the full grasp of the Iraqi army. Jurf al-Sakhr used to be a safe haven for many terrorists who took it as an origin point to attack Iraqi security forces and civilians. Meanwhile, the Iraqi army and thousands of volunteer forces succeeded to secure Gurma district in Fallujah, the closest area to the capital, after its fall into the hands of IS members several weeks ago. According to defense ministry officials, huge number of militants have been killed as a result of the military operations elsewhere in the country.
In the last 48 hours, the Iraqi forces have killed 282 terrorists and destroyed 28 vehicles belonging to the so-called Islamic State militants. And Iraqi Air Force has successfully conducted 284 air raids in several parts of Iraq.
Despite the crucial advances made by the Iraqi troops, some militants re-emerged in particular areas that the Iraqi armed forces have been liberated.
It's clear that the Iraqi army and the volunteers have made noticeable victories, and they are advancing continuously in the areas that have been seized by the terrorists. Yet, Iraqi army needs to do more to maintain its grip on the territories that have been recaptured.
Now, vigorous military operations are still underway in Anbar, Salahuddin, Diyala and Babel, aiming at expelling the militants from these provinces and restoring security. On the other hand, Iraqi Air Force is still pounding militant strongholds in Mosul with no military operation on the ground. Mustafa Qattan, Al-Ittijah, Baghdad.
Here's a recap of tonight's top stories. Hamas leader Khalid Mish'al says that any ceasefire agreement with Tel Aviv will have to include the lifting of the Israeli siege on Gaza. Diplomatic efforts to end the Israeli offensive on Gaza have so far failed to prove fruitful, as the civilian death toll nears 700. And the Palestinian Authority accuses the Zionist regime of committing a crime against humanity, while the UN says the Israeli offensive could amount to war crimes. Well, that's all from me and the Al Ittijah News team. Thank you for watching and good night.